Hey, everybody, you are joining the Treasure of Ordinary Psychotherapy program. We'll get started here in just a moment at the top of the hour, wherever your hour is. Right, we will go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining our call today that we're calling TOP, the Treasure of Ordinary Psychotherapy. As I said last week when we got together, this group has gone through many iterations of our name, really emerging out a sense of joy that we've discovered as a group, riffing together about the remarkable experience of being understood and held by another human being, and how, in our quest to learn valuable evidence-based therapies, we can forget sometimes who we are as people and the remarkable value of bringing ourselves to the therapeutic relationship. So this call's not about self-disclosure, but rather how do we communicate a sense of being real and authentically engaged and collaborating with the people we work with. Each of us, each week, will share a particular idea. During the session last week, we heard from Dr. Allen, and we'll hear from me today. Then our hub team will riff about the ideas as a group for about 10 minutes and then turn to questions. If you put questions along the way in the chat, we will get to as many as we can. So go ahead and put those questions in there as we go along. And if we don't get to them, we'll try to use the questions as a springboard for the weeks to come. It may be that one question is so deep that it takes our whole entire time. Uh, we we really are emphasizing the ideas of being spontaneous and present and authentic, and for that reason, we've elected to meet in the form of a meeting rather than a webinar. But we never anticipated such a great turnout. So thank you all for being here. We've muted microphones so that we can hear the speakers clearly without distraction. And if you can have your camera on, that's fantastic. It's an hour that we can all meet and see one another. So let's take advantage of it and feel free to eat on camera. It's lunchtime for many, or even dinner or breakfast for others, depending where you are in the world. So go for it. And a link to an evaluation survey with my PowerPoint from today will appear in your browser at the conclusion of the program. Please fill this out for CME or CEU credits if you desire those. And also importantly, no planners of this activity have indicated a relevant financial relationship with an ACCME defined ineligible company whose primary business is producing, marketing, selling, reselling, or distributing healthcare products used by or on patients. It's now my great honor to introduce our hub team, the creators of this program. So first we heard from Dr. John Allen last week, who's a clinical psychologist and retired in 2016 from his position as clinical professor of psychiatry in the Menninger Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the Baylor College of Medicine. He's continued to teach, consult, and write books in his, quote, retirement. And we have Ross Ellenhorn, a PhD, who's a sociologist who's also trained as a psychotherapist and is the owner of Ellenhorn, the most robust program in the United States focused on providing intensive psychiatric and psychosocial care for individuals in their homes and communities. And his current writing is about the intersection between interpersonal experiences of holding and larger societal and cultural forms of holding. The latter's function as a buffer to loneliness, anomie, and the emergence of totalitarianism. We have Michael Grote with us. Dr. Grote is the president and CEO of the Lindner Center for Hope, and an affiliate of the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine, where he's also associate professor of psychiatry and neuroscience. Dr. Grote trained in psychodynamic psychotherapy at the Austin Riggs Center and has spent his career working in hospitals and residential programs, including the Menninger Clinic, Silver Hill Hospital, and Cooper Reese. He has a passion for collaborative, flexible care that meets people where they are in a compassionate manner. And Dr. Robin Kissel, who is faculty at UCLA Department of Psychiatry, training and supervising analyst at the new Center for Psychoanalysis in Los Angeles, and most importantly, the director of the Mentalization Initiative based in Los Angeles, which is a nonprofit aimed at teaching the ideas of mentalization. And that group also has an ongoing 7-week virtual program that's just begun linking the mentalization community that you all can join if interested. And a link to that can also be found on the Silver Hill website. I am now going to turn to Dr. Kissel to say a few words about the speaker for today, which happens to be me, and then I'll come right back.
Good morning, everybody. It is absolutely my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Jeff Katzman, who is going to be our speaker today and take us into some playful realm. Jeff and I go way back to residency and then stayed in touch for years off and on as he went to UNM and pursued all of his interests in improvisational theater and psychodynamic psychotherapy there. And then in the last, what, 5, 6 years, we've kind of reunited in some creative efforts, and it's really my pleasure and honor to be inspired by him and to be working with him again. And I think today you're going to have a good time learning about playfulness. So Jeff Katzman is the director of education at Silver Hill Hospital and specifically of SHARE, the Silver Hill Academy of Research and Education. His lifelong work has been to help patients overcome the isolation that informs so many modern lives. He has worked extensively in psychiatric education. He studied at Stanford before medical school at UC San Diego, and then his psychiatric residency at UCLA. Following many years as a professor at the University of New Mexico and now as adjunct professor at the Yale Department of Psychiatry, he has deepened an interest in the impact of loneliness on our lives. Dr. Katzman has spoken around the world on this topic and is currently a member of the steering committee of the Connecticut Collaborative on Loneliness. He has also co-authored two very popular works, which you can find on Amazon, I'm sure, called Life Unscripted and Ensemble, and a novel, all informed by his study and passion for improvisation and its potential for deepening connection. So, with that, I welcome you, Jeff Katzman, and welcome you all to this presentation on playfulness.
Thank you, Robin, so much. And here we go. Let me share and um, see what comes up here. All right, there we go. And all right, you can see that okay? Oh, you know what? I didn't click the little box when I shared that. One sec. There we go. Okay, you can see that all right? All right. So my goal today is to really talk about the importance of play in the therapeutic relationship, and I have no disclosures to make today. Some themes I wanted to just carry forward from last week are um, some things that we were riffing about as a group. These questions of how do we balance our need to know science and what works with the needs of our clients to be understood as real people and know that they are speaking to a real human being. And how do we balance this sense? How can we know and not know simultaneously? I was talking to a friend yesterday, almost like improvising jazz. We can't improvise jazz if we don't really know a lot about music and the keyboard first. So we have to know and not know simultaneously. And how can we bring the idea of our own curiosity and personality and personal sense of jazz to our work if we are being told to provide in, evidence-based therapies where we work and um, have a sense that that's our limit. And then this question about what are our patients really looking for. So I'm going to come riffing about what I mean by play and playfulness, and then we can even talk about this as a group. I'm not talking about play therapy specifically, though that certainly could be a part of this. I'm not necessarily at all talking about being funny or humorous, but maybe joyful at times. I'm not talking about playing a game. Um, I'm talking really about a spirit of collaboration between people and a sense of flow that can develop and a respect that's shared between two human beings for being people and an sense of openness to what develops between them spontaneously, even when practicing an evidence-based therapy. So I was thinking about this and remembering what it was like for me when I was becoming a therapist at UCLA, where Robin was. Um, and I remember being in the waiting room, meeting a patient, and then this uncomfortable walk down the hallway into my little office. And then it was like a straitjacket came over me, like this professional demeanor, this costume. And I didn't really know what was happening, but suddenly I wasn't me anymore. I was some like form of what I thought was a therapist, and 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 then nobody really ever observed me doing psychotherapy. But at the same time, as Robin said, I was actually had tried out for a workshop, a training program at Second City. They had just moved to Los Angeles, and it turned out all of us who tried out made it, as long as we could just write a check. And I was learning from really seasoned improvisers about how two people who don't know what they're going to create on stage uh, become a team, and how do they collaborate, and what are those ideas. And I was observed every time I was on stage. And I remember saying to one of the faculty at UCLA, I think I'm learning more in my improvisational class about being with somebody and attuning to their reality than what we're making together than I really am in psychiatry school. Then I found this quote from Glenn Gabbard, who many of you've read, that really spoke to the experience that I'm referring to. And he said, beginning psychiatric residents commonly err in aggressively interrogating patients only to elicit history and symptoms. But another common error is the assumption of a pseudoanalytic attitude of abstinence, virtual silence, and passivity. That was me. Residents who may be warm and personable individuals suddenly become stiff, overly formal, and cold when interviewing a patient. The interviewer will get much further by becoming an active participant in the relationship, by warmly and empathically seeking to understand the patient's point of view. So that really spoke to me. Um, and for people who've watched us on the mentalizing group, you've seen this. But I think when I talk about play, and I kind of bring forth Gabbard's words, I really am talking about this. I am really talking about what we see a mother and an infant doing together. So I'm going to show you for a couple minutes Tronic still face experiment where a mom is instructed to interact with her baby and then told not to interact, and we see what happens. And we can start to think about how does this how does this relate to the therapeutic experience?
In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age. I like a girl. Oh. And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her. Yeah. This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions. They turn away. They feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing. And what are you doing? Oh, he is so wicked.
All right, I'm here, and what are you doing? Um, Beautiful. So, whoops. Um, then I found this quote from Yalom, who probably most people on the call have know and have read, and he said this. which reminds me of what we just saw. Um, At its very core, the flow of therapy should be spontaneous, forever following unanticipated riverbeds. It is grotesquely distorted by being packaged into a formula that enables inexperienced, inadequately trained therapists or computers to deliver a uniform course of therapy. One of the true abominations spawned by the managed care movement is the ever greater reliance on protocol therapy, in which therapists are required to adhere to a prescribed sequence, a schedule of topics and exercises to be followed each week. In his autobiography, Jung describes his appreciation of the uniqueness of each patient's inner world and language, a uniqueness that requires the therapist to invent a new therapy language for each patient. Perhaps I'm overstating the case, but I believe the present crisis in psychotherapy is so serious and therapist spontaneity so endangered that a radical corrective is demanded. We need to go even further. The therapist must strive to create a new therapy for each patient. From Winnicott, we hear psychotherapy takes place in the overlap of two areas of playing, that of the patient and that of the therapist. Psychotherapy has to do with two people playing together. The corollary of this is that where playing is not possible, then the work done by the therapist is directed toward bringing the patient from a state of not being able to play into a state of being able to play. But what if the therapist has forgotten how to play, or never learned, or was too afraid, or spontaneity was discouraged somewhere, or lost amidst learning specific techniques, or amidst making diagnoses, or staring at electronic medical record? Well, I had an experience supervising a third year psychiatry clinic in which I was in the room with a resident, and the patient was being evaluated for difficulty paying attention, for attentional problems. And the resident was staring at the computer and asked the patient, "What did you have problem, or when did this problem start?" And he said, "Well, it started when I saw my child drown in the swimming pool 3 years ago." The resident kept typing and said, "And did you have trouble sitting still as a child?" And the patient said, "No, this started just 3 years ago when I saw my child drown," and started to become tearful. And the resident kept going and said, "Did you often blurt out answers as a young child?" And he didn't turn from his computer, and I intervened and said, "Have you ever talked about this with anybody?" And he said, "No, I never have," and started to sob. And that resident was a good resident whose notes were always superb, and he got the highest of um, ratings based on that. And it just kind of made me wonder, what are we doing? What are we teaching? Because people don't tend to come to us behaving that way. People who become psychiatry residents are generally interested in being with people, in their stories, and in spending time with them. So that's not necessarily a playful interaction, but has to do with what I showed you in the still face experiment and how we respond. Um, and the difference between somebody not responding and somebody responding. So what do I really mean by this idea of play? Well, we know play therapy for children, and we know that play might involve throwing a baseball, but I think I mean something a little bit different. I'm meaning being responsive and collaborative, getting what the mentalizing group might call a we mode, or a sense of team spirit, or um, uh, going between ourselves and our patients, having a curiosity and adding something and wondering, an experience of flowing with somebody, even amidst both joyful or feelings or sorrow, and also happening around a model. So it turns out I've been interested in this at the same time that I got interested in a cable show that many of you have probably seen called The Walking Dead, in which the world has been experiencing an apocalypse, and people turn into zombies when they die. And zombies walk in herds and bite other people who become zombies. And the show is really about a group who are trying to survive in Atlanta among the emergence of zombies. Zombies can't don't interact with one another, but they're with each other, but they don't have any interaction between them. Sort of like that. And I think we are going toward this, creating for all of us really a sense of increasing loneliness. Just to veer off for a second, loneliness is a big deal. People in the literature now talk about it being akin to smoking 14 cigarettes a day with major medical problems associated with it and psychiatric mental health problems associated with violence and victims returning to abusers. And ask people if they're lonely, though it's epidemic in the Western world. And even England has had a minister of loneliness for 30 years. And we all know this has been exacerbated by COVID-19. And when we train, we can become even more lonely. In psychiatric training, we're kind of taught to compete with one another, and then we get to residency, and there's such an emphasis on boundaries and not disclosing and not being known, and then also a projection from the community, like you're a psychiatrist, I better be careful what I say. It can really lead to feeling alone for those of us who are providing mental health, particularly if you then have a life in private practice where you don't have a lot of experience. And this idea of shutting down our experience of becoming a zombie, it's ripe in the psychodynamic literature. And Frieda from Reichman talked about loneliness in this way. Michael Eichen talked about psychic deadness in his work about zombies. Winnicott told us about the false self developing a true self, so not really feeling alive. And Guntrip talking about really the abandonment of our heart and of really a way of knowing ourselves. We know from the attachment world, the whole idea of dismissive attachments and shutting down what feels real and shutting down what makes us feel alive. And Stern talks about those are often vitality affects that we've experienced from the beginning of life. Christopher Bollas talked about the normotic personality, where we want to do what's normal, and the Fonagy-Bateman model of mentalizing both talks about a we mode, but also this pretend mode is, to me, a bit of a zombification where we're not really aware of feeling alive. Recently, I'm studying a model called open awareness, in which there's a description of how we become kind of telezombies, like I showed you with our different devices. So I want to talk to you about a few cases in which this was a little bit helpful for me to think about. 1 year prior to my experience of watching The Walking Dead, I was referred a college freshman with a lifelong experience of depression, and it was a time when I knew nothing of the ideas of a zombie apocalypse. He was a straight A+ college student from an Ivy League school who had never been in a relationship and was mostly concerned and determined to get in high grades. He was at home for the summer living with his mom, who sounded a little controlling and who the patient really idealized. The patient was depressed and actually kind of lifeless and difficult to sit with for a full session as he rambled about his classes and what he needed to do for each class. And in retrospect, he also seemed quite lonely, and there was little more to his life than advanced chemistry courses and linear algebra as he was trying to enter the world of astrophysics. But he shared with me his recurring dreams of the zombie apocalypse and told me this was something that was of great interest to him. And he lit up with passion when talking about these dreams. And he was always a survivor in the story, employing different strategies, many times with an unknown friend of his. And I thought then that perhaps his inner life was like the apocalypse, with defenses or strategies he could employ to survive his treacherous inner world, with a background anxiety always there, akin to the threat of a zombie attack. And I assumed a kind of parental pressure was driving him on this current life path, and perhaps I was his new friend taking on the apocalypse. But when I began to interpret in this way, he rolled his eyes at me. I didn't get it clearly. And I suppose if I had just gotten really interested in the dreams and began inquiring about zombies and his interest in them and what they were like and sharing his excitement, things might have gone a little bit differently. he may have felt less alone, and we may have developed a bit more of an alliance rather than my dynamic interpretations that I think were about as deadening as the apocalypse itself. Though I was proud of my insights, he left therapy after 8 sessions, and I really believe now that um, if I had tapped into the life force he seemed to experience while talking about zombies, we may have gotten further. I thought of this patient myself when I became involved with watching The Walking Dead and realized the excitement I had when watching it and how I loved to chat about it on Monday mornings with the administrative staff at the University of New Mexico where I was working, and the playfulness that we had in talking about the show. And that wondered maybe the image of the zombie actually taps into our dread of isolation. In some way, my patient was searching for someone to understand that experience with him, and was offering up the images of the zombies in his desire to connect. So, in another clinical example, I was seeing a 50-year-old lawyer whose first love of his life had dropped dead suddenly of a heart attack, and worked through this over the first year together, sharing his feelings of loss and grief and anger and sadness. But the therapy evolved into a period of kind of embitterment in his descriptions that really no one ultimately cared about him and or anybody, that people, he said, just suck, and he would say. And we were both watching The Walking Dead, though. And at the end of the sessions, he would become alive, saying, "Did you see it this week?" With a bright smile, his affect would change as though he was waiting for the session to be over to really connect over talking about The Walking Dead and perhaps feel understood and less lonely and share our thoughts and excitement. At one point, he said, "I wish I could be Daryl," a character in The Walking Dead. In curiosity, I began to wonder with him about that, and our conversations began to incorporate ideas from The Walking Dead over the backdrop of his life um, during the session. And then he shared a dream with me. He said, I was in an office. She was reviewing all my life credentials on yellowed paper and put them in a file. And she noted that there was something wrong there, but it wasn't too important and it could be taken up at a later date. I then went down the stairs where I met a man who gazed at me in the eyes, and I gazed back, and I felt a rush over my body and woke up. And I knew that man in the stairwell was you. And he looked at me tearful, and I felt alive for the very first time. He said, "You saw that I had been in pain, and then you took it seriously, and then you went with me and talked about what I really wanted to talk about." Sec. So, getting back to this idea, what is playfulness? In the literature, it says it's the therapist's ability to approach interactions with openness, curiosity, and authenticity. Playfulness prioritizes engagement over external consequence, realness, or convention. And, and from the interdisciplinary study of play, there's definitions with 6 immersion themes. It's focused, like when we're playing a game. There's an openness, like a willingness to engage with any contact. There's a framing that can shift how how someone's thinking about something, and it's non-consequential. There's no expected outcome. And it can be involved with a non-real reality and symbol use, um, like thinking about a baby in a blanket from a pile of wood. And it can be experienced as unconventional, like the opposite of appropriateness. It's often considered maybe unprofessional to be too playful because boundaries matter, and we need to be providing evidence-based practices. But I believe the spirit of being playful can be incorporated. And I think from what I learned in improvisational theater, those ideas involve saying yes and building something with somebody, having a not knowing stance and a sense of wonder about what's going to happen when you're up on stage with somebody, about making your partner look good and caring about their welfare when you're creating something together, and the realization that mistakes are gifts and opportunities rather than worrying, as I said in the beginning of this, about the right thing to say that, as Gabbard said, often uh, calls people. Oh, I think I'm on them. Yeah. So I want to share something from one of my greatest teachers, an improv teacher who um, gave me notes after a scene. We always got notes after every scene in our workshops that we would do. And this particular scene, I was up on stage and I was playing marbles with somebody. We were invisible marbles, and we were both lying down on the stage, and we were flicking the marbles, and we would talk about the marbles and which one hit what and which colors they were, and maybe bring something up going on in our life while we were playing marbles, just chatting with each other. And then I said to him, you cheated. And we got into a kind of little fight on stage about whether he cheated or not. And we created something, and the scene ended. And this teacher, who was such a wonderful guy, he said to me, "You guys, that was amazing, but can we do it again? And Jeff, can you just go back and actually realize how much we loved being there playing marbles with you and watching you play marbles, and just for a minute pretend he didn't cheat and just keep going playing marbles." And I think he was really um, telling me how enjoyable it was to actually be with us as we were connecting in a kind of flow state around this. So I think playfulness in the therapist matters. It encourages our creativity and our ability to build rapport and trust with our clients and address complicated emotions in a safe and accessible way, and can become a model of how one can be in the world. And a client can start to know that we're responding to them specifically, like Yalom talked about. And most all of us, when we're going to a doctor or a therapist or meeting someone new, we want to meet a real person who can interact with us, often in a playful way. There is a neuroscience of play, though play isn't necessarily sharing the same definition across these, but does show that people who score higher on scales of playfulness show greater strength of character, that it activates dopamine systems when we're involved in it, and it enhances problem solving and stress management capacities as we have greater capacity to play. So in thinking about ourselves, it's good to think about how playful am I as a therapist, and what does that mean to me, um, and what are my experiences of learning about how to collaborate, and what does help me build this capacity in my life, so that I can become a more um, playful person. I'm gonna um, just end with this, that I don't think this is something that I'm talking about that uh, I think it needs to be nurtured and nourished and encouraged, and I don't think we do a good job of that. And I like this idea of the Velveteen Rabbit, because I think playfulness ultimately involves connecting with our authentic being and having that be in the room with our patients. And in this horse to the Velveteen Rabbit, you become. It takes a long time, and that's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily or who have sharp edges or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off and your eyes drop out and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand. So in summary, I think I'm talking about playfulness as a tool that we have as a way to connect, and however we define it for ourselves, to not be a zombie. And it's not a distraction, and it can support evidence-based interventions. And we can wonder about what practical steps we as therapists can take to become more playful in our lives. And with that, I'm going to turn to our group.
All right, Jeff, again, just a wonderful uh, review of the significance of play, looking at the literature and this kind of whole tradition. And I love how you have woven in improv and the spirit of improv through as kind of a thread through the discussion about play in the context of therapy. I have all kinds of associations to what you're presenting, and the notion of being part of a herd really, stood out to me. And, in a way, you're saying that being willing, being open to stepping outside the herd a bit and to come alive, kind of be on fire a little bit, um, is a way of really differentiating ourselves from kind of falling into unthought, uh, lack of spontaneous interactions. And um, it makes me think about what are the elements that facilitate spark or the vitality that you mentioned.
Mm.
And I'm reminded of, there's been a kind of a growing movement as one variant of psychotherapies around RODBT, which is this kind of radically open. And I've seen some people do exercises where they're asked to do things that are really stepping outside of, kind of like the zombie, right? They're being pushed to, or encouraged, nurtured to step outside of um, kind of a constriction that has defined their way of being. And so I'm finding myself thinking a lot about what are the elements of, what facilitates play, because you started out by saying, maybe that gets lost, or maybe
Mhm.
it's not really nurtured as for us as therapists. And how do we develop that? How do we nurture that? How do we uh, spark it?
Yeah, great catch. I mean,
And you did it through improv, which is awesome.
yeah. I think there's also a safety involved here, right? And a trust involved that we have to feel it's okay to be ourselves and okay to connect um, uh, and is also maybe something that um, yeah. Well, I'll let the others kind of share ideas here.
I can weigh in, Jeff. I I thought that you did a beautiful job in framing the challenges. I think with the evidence-based treatment, and I can't stop thinking about that. Therapist looking at the computer and the patient talking about the child drowning. And it's just shocking that that could happen.
Right.
Actually, that should shock us that that could happen. But I do think we face this challenge of how do we do therapy if we're doing some kind of structured manualized therapy. And the irony about the manuals is that the therapist as a human being is considered noise that needs to be reduced so you can have the pure treatment.
Mm.
Frankly, it's really insane. And I think what you're describing is a way to be. It doesn't mean that you can't do structured procedures. As you know, the person watching the marbles said, "Hey, wait a second, there are other ways to do this improvising thing." But it's just that I guess the drowning is something that we should remember, sadly, that this can happen in the way people are taught to do psychotherapy should really shock us all.
Yeah.
And you've done such a beautiful job
Oh,
of,
thanks, John.
bringing humanity into it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that moment has really kind of lived on for me
Yeah.
as something that's, and especially because the way we often evaluate people is in the quality of their notes, um,
Yeah.
uh, and not actually um, thinking about how is somebody learning to respond to another person. Um,
Yeah. Thanks.
I have somebody here talking about uh, the way to spark things is to do something where you're drawing the family or involved in something like that. You know, play is probably this thing that's preparing us to be cultural beings. I mean, it's what we are. We connect around culture. Culture's probably there to make us feel like we're connected to something larger than ourselves. We used to be much more embedded in culture. We used to kind of define our experience. And I think we have to kind of bring it back in and actually do bring art back in and bring in cultural experiences. And Jeff, your description of those conversations about The Walking Dead are cultural conversations. Our lives used to be surrounded by them. All this commonality of what happened during the day, you know? And now we have to kind of look and search for it. There's a poverty of the ability to kind of talk about a culture we all know. Um, but it seems like it's a central element to sparking it. I'm always sparked when someone wants to have a conversation about a TV show I've read, or I've seen, or something like that, or some podcast I've heard. And I think we sort of need more of that in our experiences.
Yeah.
I respond to what you're saying, Ross. First of all, Jeff, thank you so much. These just so rich, and we can all relate to all these examples so easily. But I'm thinking about what you're saying, Ross, and yes, we do need to be able to kind of just play, but isn't it interesting to think about what the patient brings that allows us to know that we can begin to go into that zone?
Mm-hmm.
Um, what do they convey to us that lets us know we're safe to begin to be able to be playful with them and to develop this collaborative, playful space? I mean, we are trying to read them and to know what they need and want, but I think we do take a signal from them.
Mm.
And I'm also thinking about improv and, how improv so allows you to connect, but it also allows you to be zany, and and off the wall. And we don't quite want to do that with our
No.
patients either.
Right.
So, the theoretical, thinking about what you've said, John, the theoretical, if we can put it in our background or backdrop so that it's not what we're relying on and performing with, but I don't know, you're stimulating me to think about all these things, guys.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Robin, you're making me think about the role of intuition and risk, right? We're trying to
Mm,
kind of find our way into these encounters and think about, is this an opening? Is this a place where we can connect?
Yeah. I'm also not sure that there's a distinction between being in a dialogue and play. I kind of think they're the same thing. And so it's not always a audacious act of fun. It's be, being in a space where you're in a state of curiosity about them.
Mhm.
mhm,
Um, but I also think, we're trying to build trust, right? To make play happen. And if you have a client who isn't ready for it and wants a serious doctor, you probably should be giving them that for a while, right? I mean, this you don't want to break what they're looking for in what they're going to trust most, which is, as John would point out, is your competence, you
mhm,
know. And
mhm.
so to just come in as an improviser probably not going to work for a lot of
Yeah,
people,
yeah,
you
so
know.
Right.
You know,
interesting.
yeah.
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 Ross, one of our participants noted that being playful doesn't have to include dialogue. Going back to that idea.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. You mean language? Is that what you mean, Michael?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I
Yeah.
mean,
yeah.
going back to the idea of, drawing, or had a patient once who was so phobic of speaking, we sat in silence for weeks until discovered she played the saxophone, and she brought it in and she played me a song. And that was
Yeah.
our first discussion.
Mhm.
Yeah, and the video, the still face, is it's not about language. It's about a communication of dialogue through a behavior and gesture, and eye contact.
Yeah. There's something remarkable about the Walking Dead in that there were some episodes in which well, first of all, it became clear that it's these living people are the Walking Dead, not the zombies, and that they're actually in this state of trying to survive in this world. They're not actually living, and so every so often there would be a scene of like a couple of them coming upon a bar, um, and just having a conversation for the whole episode. They were just connecting, and it was so simultaneously, I remember thinking, like, what are they doing? Like, where's the next zombie death going to happen or something? But it was making such a point about like really um the whole theme here is in the need to survive and the need to get through the day in that world and also our world. we cannot have opportunities to connect, and just how sparse they are and meaningful they are, and when we can stop to do that, and how we can remember, even for me, how we can remember those moments of therapy the best, of our own therapies and our therapy with our clients. So there's certain moments that will stand out around, and they often involve some kind of playfulness, something different that happened, um, something like that.
One of our participants is wondering about people who might be profoundly hopeless, and the idea of being playful, just seems incredibly distant. And um, it reminds me, John Allen, of discussions I've seen you have around kind of lending hope. And I wonder if there's something about lending play.
Mm.
Do we lend a playfulness that people can't even imagine for themselves? Like if you're a zombie and you don't know what it's like, how would you? I mean, does someone lend it to you? Maybe.
Right, right. And how do you do that? Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful idea. Yeah.
Yeah, the hope scale is all about play. It's about alternative pathways. It's about when you meet a barrier, you improvise a new way around it. When you take that scale, you're really taking a scale on play. And then the other half of it is, do you feel effective, which is also what play makes you feel, And so they go together. I don't know how to fix that, but they go together. They play off each other.
I like to say that hope is a problem, not a solution. That it requires tolerating uncertainty, navigating between presumption and despair. And the word play doesn't seem to fit the feeling of what that's like. But it's all uncertainty and improvisation. I do think sitting with people who are hopeless, my sense is being there without being able to do anything is really the best I felt that I could do. Not giving up, sticking with it, and
Yeah.
kind of implying that there's hope,
Yeah.
not quitting.
That you can bear it with them and go in there with them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You remain. Yeah.
Not alone.
Yeah.
That's the key.
Mhm.
Got a note that one of our participants, Dr. Mark Russ, had his hand up and wanted to make a comment.
Sure. A way to unmute, Mark.
Am I
Yeah.
unmuted? Yes. Um, I think the idea that, first of all, thank you, Jeff. It's terrific discussion.
Thanks, Mark.
The idea that the notion of play may lack a certain sense of respectability is something that I would like to address. The very first course I took in college was a course called Gods and Games. And much of it was based on the work of Johann Huizinga, Dutch philosopher, who wrote about the seminal nature of play in all of culture. And we've been looking and talking about play as um, sort of an anti-structure in a way, or the antithesis of structure. But Huizinga would argue exactly the opposite, that all psychotherapy is play, just like politics is play and war is play, and really the main foundations of civilization are in fact play. They have their rules, they have their consequences, so on and so forth. So I think this notion of play or playfulness is not only important, but it's extremely seminal to what we do, whether we know it or not, and whether we're being playful or not. These are all manifestations, I think, of play, and it's just terrific way of thinking about the work that we do. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. And I think it's not something we think about, right? Particularly for trainees who are learning to be therapists and really kind of struggling, like I was talking about myself. Like that and like you were talking about last week, John, like how important it is to encourage people to bring themselves into the room, not like Robin said, not to be zany or wacky like an improviser, but actually um, to be a person who can be confident about being playful and interacting rather than like I did, find this deadening interpretation and miss the person completely. Um, like how do we actually get curious, um, wonder, and shoot marbles with somebody with the idea and the confidence that something's going to emerge out of that, something important. Even like we're doing right now, we don't really know we're playing, and we don't know where we're going, and we're so thankful and reliant on people sending in questions and all the ideas in the chat. But it's there's a vitality in it, I think.
And,
Yeah,
and
I'd
that,
like to
go ahead, John.
make a comment about something I saw in the chat, which is how did we get here? How could we get to the point where a therapist would behave in that way? And it goes back, I think, to what Ross was saying about we have to think about the culture.
Mhm.
And what we're doing is countercultural in some respects.
Yep. It's the same reason why your neighborhoods look like a mall now. It's about normalization. It's about everybody being the same. We since the 1950s, this country has been heading in this direction towards normalization. There's the normative personality disorder, and we can get caught up into that process.
Yeah, I heard from my someone close to me yesterday a term I didn't know that should have the McDonaldization of
Yeah.
healthcare. Um,
Yeah.
I had never heard of that. Yeah.
Well,
And
another kind of angle, though, is looking at some of the comments. There was a comment made about the role of trauma, and I'm thinking about trauma because one of the things that trauma introduces is a threat to survival. And a lot of ways, this kind of more playful approach has been under threat. It's been under siege.
mhm.
Maybe not traumatized per se, but there's something about the threat that has, I think, contributed to the standardization and the efforts to the kind of hyper focus on following the rules and the procedures. I think
It
that's in
also
there.
makes, yeah, I'm sorry, Michael. It also makes me think that it's standardization and normalcy, but there's somehow efficiency is in this,
Yes,
Yeah.
you know,
efficiency. Yes.
Yeah.
so
Uh-huh.
short-term treatments
Yeah.
and be
Yeah.
effective. And play takes space and automatically
Mhm.
Time
time.
and time. Yeah, a lot of time.
And I think
That-
that same process teaches us to shut down our responsiveness and our being moved by our patients. So I think this also connects to like if I'm moved, do I need to like shut down my tears? Is that helpful to somebody, or is it more helpful to know we're connected and I've been affected and thank you for and then I understand you in an emotional way and that's not like playful in how an improviser would be on a stage creating something. There is something in which we're connected and responsive and open with each other. And as a therapist, I'm not hiding. I'm not self-disclosing, but I'm not hiding necessarily who I am, but behind like this still face.
Jeff, I'm thinking about that question about hope right now when you say that. And every time we're in a state of recognition of a client, we're we're an envoy to what they could find in the world.
Yeah.
And some of our clients feel unrecognized. There's a sort of shock when they're treated in a recognized way that they raises their hope. Oh, there's a world out there of others like Jeff where this is actually a possibility, you know? Yeah.
I like that word envoy.
Mhm. You didn't mention it, Jeff, but I'm thinking about the Winnicottian third space too, the play space we create. Little different than improv where you're one to one, but you are looking at something together and there's a joint desire to do that, and it gives the space to go back and forth.
it is about managing a space,
Mm,
right?
I
Like,
think so.
right, yeah.
Mhm.
We 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 did have a question very early on, which is a motif for us, which is uh, how do you do this when you're assessing somebody, when there are these demands to kind of report back things that aren't playful, you know? And
How
I
do you
don't know if
keep the
we,
spark?
yeah, I don't know if we've gotten proficient at answering that question yet, but maybe
Yeah,
we should try.
how do you maintain this? How do you keep a spark when there's a lot of forces that snuff out sparks?
Yeah.
Yeah. It does seem though with any evidence-based therapy that there's a way to make it your own, um,
Hmm.
to kind of bring it inside yourself, like John was talking to us about last week. So, and I mean, I think when you look at the great therapists, right, who claim to be doing various different evidence-based therapies, it becomes almost non-discernible, um, which various therapies they're doing because things start to look very similar, um,
Hmm.
in the end. And I think part of that um, is that you have somebody being responsive and they may have a model that's guiding them, but it's a model. Um, I think, like Yalom said, like from a person that's individually tailored to a person. And so I think we can still document whatever we need to document. But like the story I told of that trainee, we can't let the documenting guide our way of helping people.
Yeah.
Well said. There's a lot of questions about that. I don't know if Dr. Russ, you're still on. A number of people are asking about the name of that book and the author again. And as we kind of play with ideas and possibilities. Maybe you could put that in the chat, Dr. Russ.
I will put it in the chat.
Thank you so much.
Right.
I love some idea sharing. That's wonderful. We're a community of learners.
Yeah, I think we've put play in a real box, haven't we?
Mhm.
You know, of
And
fun and games. And, Thoreau, right before he said that famous line about lives of quiet desperation, he sort of said we're in trouble because we've made play into amusement and something you do after work,
yeah,
you know.
to me, it also happens most if a client, a patient brings in a dream, and we're talking about a dream, and is like this, we can shoot marbles around the dream and build something together about what that means. Not I know or I'm going to figure it out, but or that you have the associate, but together we can get a sense of playing marbles around developing this idea and remembering past things, and there's that way of playing around that really um, creates a sense of connection and anti-loneliness and all that, and
Yeah,
potentially, yeah, yeah, the opposite of a zombie.
Mm,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
mhm.
yeah. John, somebody asked about where they could read about borrowing hope in one of your books. Is there?
I just mentioned it. I must have learned it from a patient.
Yeah.
We borrow hope when we can't feel it in ourselves, but if the person we borrow from is credible,
Mhm.
that can help the person say, okay, someone else can see something in me that I can't. So
Hmm.
I don't remember where I learned it, but it's a great idea.
Hmm.
Yes.
I want to say that just glancing at the chat, one thing that's encouraging to me is that we've got a lot of people playing here in
Mhm.
what we're talking about, a lot of reflection and interesting ideas, and that there's something about the spirit that people are borrowing.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. I also want to, I see a quote, a comment from Joan Selzeller that I think is really important, and that says, the first way to be playful is to make sure we are caring for ourselves and dealing with our own stuff. And if we are burnout, we cannot play effectively. And I think I was kind of trying to also get that in there through that a little bit about if we can't bring this then how can it be there? If Winnicott says that part of the whole purpose of a therapy is to help somebody remember how to play. So I think it's a time in our world to reflect on like how do we take care of ourselves and how do we connect and how do we um, how do we bring a spirit to our interactions and what do we need to do to focus on that? And hopefully this little series is can help people to nurture that sense.
Yeah, I feel sorrow that we're going to have to end, Jeff.
I know,
Yeah.
and we'll be back in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you, everybody, for being part of this community with us. It means so much to riff around these concepts. We'll continue to bring a different window or to the similar idea of how we can become ourselves to help our patients in the best way possible, no matter what kind of therapy we're delivering. So, thank you, everybody, for being here. There will be a link that pops up with an evaluation and also the PowerPoints that I shared. So thanks again, and we'll see you in a bit.
Thanks, everyone.